Welcome back to another episode of Eerie Excursions, the podcast that takes the road less travelled and a left turn into the shadows, with me, Ami, a history nerd who loves a good ghost story. Now, I'm no expert, so along our eerie adventure, we'll meet local guides who know all about the spooky legends lurking in their back garden. And watch out, because we might just be down the road from where you are right now. This week, we're in the northwest of England, in the city of Chester.
Somebody has said to the vicar of St. John's that this is a thin place. This was a pagan Christian, and he was told that this Chester was a thin place where it's easy for people from the other world to come through.
You ready to delve into the darkness? Now, Chester sits near the Welsh border and is a beautifully preserved city surrounded by historic walls. The streets are lined with the Chester Rows, which are two-tiered, half-timbered galleries that feature a selection of shops and pubs. You really feel like you're stepping back in time.
So the history of Chester started off like a lot of the fortresses, the Roman fortresses, started off in about AD 74. The Second Legion were here. They built the wooden rampart fortress, and then along came the 20th Legion, and they built the beautiful stone one because it was built to last hundreds of years. And in the early 400s, the 20th Legion went out to Germany to fight to save the empire. Now, they'd already left Chester for a while because they walked up to Hadrian's Wall, built a third of Hadrian's Wall, and walked back. So by the time that people realised that the empire had crumbled, so had the fortress. So people moved in and built on top of the ruins. And then they lived happily ever after. People walked along what we now call the rows and then put overshoes on, went down the steps, went across the road, the muddy road, and then up the steps to do their shopping on the next row. Very happy until along comes Edward I, who wants to build all those castles around Wales to keep the Welsh in their place. And the last people he can have building a castle against the Welsh in Wales are Welsh masons. So he pulls people from Scotland all over England, and they gather in Chester before they're sent off to Carnarvon, Conwy, Beaumaris, wherever. And I think while they're here, the people on the rows say, put your pint down and get digging. And they dig in the rubble and they create all the street level shops. And most of them now have, over the centuries, have been plasterboarded and modernised and so on, but some of them are still the original 12th century, 13th century. It's just stunning. And that's how we become the unique city. Now, around about 800, the Anglo-Saxons are settled here, and they're being attacked by a lot of people, Vikings, Welsh, anybody and everybody. So they decide to make Chester into a fortified town. So they build the walls up again on the two sides, and then the rest, they take the walls right down to the river, and that makes it into a fortified town. And then later on, along comes the French, 1066 and all that, and the French build the walls either along the river, and then that makes it a complete run of walls all the way around to keep all our enemies out. Then when we get to Georgian and Victorian times, they think, yeah, we're not going to get bothered by too many people. Let's make the walls into a nice walkway. So we've got the wishing steps that the Georgians put in. where if you run up and down the steps in one breath, your wish will be granted. I know. And it's about 2 miles all the way around. And we don't go down every time we come to a road. We take the bridge across. And the bridges, the gates until about 1800 were really serious gates. They were there to strengthen the town. And when they opened, people coming in had to pay a tax on what they were bringing in to sell at the markets. But around about 1800, got rid of the gates, got rid of the tax, and it's been the Chester it is now ever since. But I just think it's wonderful. We have the footprint of the whole of history from the Romans. All our main roads are Roman, and the footprint of the Roman buildings are still there.
And that was our guide for this week, Mary Ann.
My name is Mary Ann Cameron. I've lived in Chester for a long, long time. And once I retired, I became a tour guide of Chester after having done the course that we all do, a year-long course to become an accredited, a qualified guide. And as soon as I became a qualified guide, they said, would you like to do ghost tours? And I said, yes, of course. So first of all, I had to do the research because I didn't know about all the ghosts in Chester. And then once I started doing them, the stories started rolling in. And after a few years, I wrote the first Chester City of Ghosts, and it was 13,500 words. I went around all the town checking on all the ghosts. And then during the pandemic, somebody said, Mary Ann, you've collected so many new ghost stories. Do it again. So the second version of Chester City of Ghosts was 3 times as long. Because I go on the radio, the local radio, D106.3, every October. And on the run up to Halloween, I relate one ghost story, news ghost story that I've picked up over the year.
Now I meet Mary Ann at the Chester Cross, a monument first erected in the 14th century that sits at the heart of the bustling streets of Chester, at the junction of Watergate Street, Bridge Street, and Eastgate Street. And it's down the latter that we find our first stop.
So we're on the North Gate now, the bottom of North Gate, and we're outside a lovely, lovely shop called the Scented Garden. This is where you come when you deserve to be pampered. But this is their third place that they've been in, because the first 2 times they left because of the ghost activity. And they moved here, and I came to see them, as I often do. And I said, how's it going? And they said, nothing. We've had nothing thrown around in the kitchen. We've had nothing smashed. It's wonderful. And then about a year ago, I came in here and they said, oh, it started again. Now, the lady who runs it is here first thing every morning before anybody comes. And she goes around the whole shop and she hoovers and she cleans and she puts everything absolutely perfect. And upstairs, when they leave at night, they open the 2 treatment room doors so that they can air because there's no opening windows. And she went upstairs to the first one. She's hoovering, she's cleaning, she's sorting out. And she heard the door next to the treatment room next door slam. And she thought, cannot slam because the carpet is so thick. They have to push it open. So she went, she opened the door, and loads of things were just on the floor. And she thought, what has happened here? Put everything back to order, came out, turned left to go down the stairs, and there's a chair to the right by the wall. And she said, just out of the corner of her eye, she could see a man sitting in the chair. And as he clocked that she'd noticed him, she said she could describe him. He had his right foot on his left knee. And as she noticed him, he just went like that, as though to say, do you see what I did? And she said when she turned fully, she couldn't see him. But she said since then, things have started happening. Now, we have no idea whether it's the ghost from the previous place who's just found her or whether it's a new ghost. We have no idea because she seems to attract ghosts. This is just such a wonderful story. And to tell you the truth, I can feel something here now just talking about it. Yeah. there is something.
Do we know the history of this particular building?
We do not know the history of this particular building at all. The history of the Rose, there's so many stories about the history of the Rose. This was where the legate's house was. That's where the Principia building, the administrative building was, and this where the principal officer was. And when they left, people, the Anglo-Saxons, moved in eventually and started building on the ruins. And then in the late 1200s, 1300s, people were coming here, masons were coming here before they were sent off to build all those castles around Wales. So they were master builders, and they started digging underneath and creating new shops. And that's how we get the Rose. But this particular building, nothing that we know about.
Does he look like he's from a certain era?
She thinks he's from about the Georgian era.
Oh, okay.
By his clothes.
Oh, okay.
Probably by his cheekiness.
So we stay on Eastgate Street and look across the shops to the other side of the road. Right opposite us sits the former Browns of Chester, or more commonly known across the UK as Debenhams. And Marianne points to the ground floor windows.
So can you see where the last two pictures are down there?
Yes.
Now, that used to be the toy shop.
Okay.
When my kids were little, that was the toy shop. Perfect place. We'd go in there. It was just perfect for children. Didn't have many steps to go down. And then suddenly they moved it upstairs. And I thought, this is not a good thing to do. If you've got kids, you don't want to go trolling up to the second floor with them all. There must be a reason. But I didn't find out until Maria, this lovely lady who worked there, told me. And apparently it was because of the little boy ghost. So you can see where the gate is fixed up there, waiting for it to be opened by Harrods. So to the right was the toy department, and to the left was the luggage department. Absolutely fine. And then the little boy was so naughty in upsetting people that the management said, we have to move it. We're getting so many complaints. Some people would see him running around. Others would pick up a doll and think, oh, this would be lovely for my grandchild. And then the doll's mouth would open and little boy would say, play with me. Play with me.
That must be very scary.
Freaked them out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she told me so many stories, but this is just such a lovely one to tell everybody when I'm doing the ghost tours. And then, a while ago, one lass was on my tour and she said, I helped move those. I was the last one out and he played a trick on me. What happened? Tell everybody. And apparently, first of all, they took all the toys out up in the lift up to the new department before they moved the shoes down. And she said, I had the last box and I just lifted it up and walked towards the lift to join the others. And somebody behind me just went, boo. And she said, and I jumped a mile and turned around thinking it would be one of my colleagues behind. She said, nobody there.
No.
Went to the lift, they were all there. So that was a good story. And then last Halloween, I'm telling her story as well as Maria's story. And somebody in my group said, yep, I was manageress of that department. He was a devil.
Okay.
She said every morning, the first thing I had to do was to go and collect everything he'd moved into the luggage department. And she said one day he had taken every doll out of the toy department and lined them up in front of every suitcase in the luggage department.
Oh my gosh.
And I just love it when you hear one story and then everybody else says, yep, I know that one. I know that one.
The boy, I'm going to ask you this of every ghost.
Yeah.
Do we have an idea of who he is or what kind of
No.
year he's come from?
Absolutely none at all. But we don't know what the building was like beforehand. There would have been something there.
Yeah. So we don't know what it was before Debenhams, before Brown.
Oh, there will have been shops there. There will have been shops. But Sarah took over the white bit. And within 20 years, she'd made so much money. her sons then extended it and did that beautiful Gothic building.
Leaving the shops and the mystery of the little boy ghost, we head towards Chester's Town Hall.
I was at a function here and somebody said to me, "Oh, you're a ghost guide. You need to see the town hall keeper." So I came down the stairs and there's a little office just there, sort of like an entrance office. And there was a man there. And I said, "I've been told to look for the town hall keeper." And he said, "That's me." I said, "I gather you see ghosts." He said, "Yeah, I'm watching them on the TV at the moment." So I said, "Let me in." And he had this CCTV camera on the back room. Now, that's where the old Victorian Magistrates Court was on the right. And on the left, there's a huge function room. And the cleaners, apparently the day before, had been tidying up the room after a big function, getting all the tables out and cleaning the floor and so on. And they'd come as a group to see him and said, "Something's going on in that room. There's somebody making a noise and we don't know who's doing it or where it's coming from. Come and sort it out." So he said, "What noise?" It's like a ba-yoing, ba-yoing, ba-yoing. It's doing our heads in. We can hear it even over the hoovers. So he went into the room, great big long rectangular room, and he went to the back left-hand side. Now, all down the left-hand side, there are huge windows, huge curtains, really heavy curtains, and they are opened and closed by cords. And he went up to one and just flicked the cord. And the cord made exactly the same sound. Ba-yoing, ba-yoing. And they said, "But there was nobody there. But that was the noise." So they've no idea who it is. And then he said, "Do you want to see my drawing of the last ghost I saw? Saw him on the stairs last night," and showed me this drawing of a man. So there's a man in Victorian dress and a woman in Victorian dress he regularly sees walking up and down the stairs. But the one I really like, he said sometimes when he goes right to the very back, he can hear dogs barking. And I said, "Explain." And he said, "Well, there used to be the police station just is round the corner and it's still there, but it's very small now compared to what it was. And it had a dog pound. You are much too young to remember dog catchers. They used to go around catching stray dogs and they put them in the dog pound. And they went by the 1950s, 1960s. But he said while they were there, they obviously made such a racket. The the noise of them
Yeah.
is still in the fabric of the building and he can still hear it.
Incredible.
I know.
I'm surprised you didn't get so freaked out because I think dogs barking are usually when you read or you listen or you watch any like ghost.
Oh no.
It's always the dogs barking is usually an omen, isn't it?
No, what freaked him out was when he heard the dogs barking. So he came walking back. And as I said, on that side is the old magistrate's court. And he heard somebody hammering on the inside of the door to the magistrate's court. And he knows that place is locked up most of the time. He said, "I didn't open the door to see who was there. I just came straight back to my little office."
For those unfamiliar with the geography of the northwest of England, you should know that Chester sits near some major cities that grew during the Industrial Revolution. Shout out to Manchester and Liverpool. But unlike its neighbours, Chester's skies were never painted black with the factory smog. In fact, it was very much a place of leisure, even back then. And what's one great pastime of the UK? The pub, of course. Marianne tells me that before the railways, Chester was home to over 400 pubs, and she takes me to one of the pubs still standing today.
I'm taking you to the Pied Bull now.
Okay.
This is interesting because the housekeeper there sees ghost activity lots. The man it's got its own brewery, and the man down in the cellar never sees a thing. And he should do because there is a ghost resident in the cellar.
And honestly, it's no wonder there's ghost activity here, as the Pied Bull claims to be one of the oldest coaching inns and pubs in Chester, dating back to 1155.
So when I was researching to be a ghost guide, 3 ghosts here. There's the ghost of one that I would like to have in my house, ghost of a maid dressed in black with a little white frilly apron, and she goes around trying to clean a couple of the rooms. Could definitely do with her. And then there's a ghost of a man who died when he died in a fire in the stables where his horse was. He can be seen drinking here on the ground floor. But if I've got foreign students, I teach them a good Yorkshire word, gormless, because there is a ghost in the cellar who is gormless. And to my mind, he shouldn't be a ghost, because we're going back to way before electricity. So if you wanted more beer, the landlord or somebody had to go down in the cellar with a jug and fill it up with beer and then bring it up. And there'd be no lighting apart from candles. By the end of the evening, the stone steps, already worn, would be damp as well as worn. So he went down the steps with the jug in one hand and for some reason a knife in the other. And he slipped and he fell and he went over and over and landed at the bottom. The jug was smashed and the knife was firmly embedded in his stomach. And he is still complaining about it to this day. But the man who makes the beer in the microbrewery down there, he's never seen him at all, but other people have. They'll be at the top of the stairs and they'll see him walking past the bottom of the stairs. But I was going around checking the stories once, because every so often I'll go around and say, any activity here recently. And I was talking to somebody who was a manager of a restaurant down Bridge Street. And just as I was going, he said, do you know about the ghosts in the Pied Bull? I said, oh, yeah, 3 of them. Not bad, eh? He said, no, but I used to live there. And then he told me this fascinating story. Come round here.
So we go round the corner of the pub, which, if you're coming out of it, is the first turning on your left.
So this is King Street. And if you look down King Street, you can see how far the pub used to reach. Now they've got extra bedrooms for people to stay here, but those bedrooms used to be stables and where the carriages used to go and where people mended the carriages and so on. This was Wattle and Daub. That was Wattle and Daub, but right up at the top, he said, now this lad was in his 30s, and he said his parents were landlord and landlady when he was about 7 years old. So we were talking just only 2 or 3 decades ago. And he said all the walls on the second floor were compressed straw. Now, I'd never heard of that. He said, no, you couldn't hang anything off the walls. So I said, never heard of that. I'm going to check. Came in here. I said, compressed straw up there? Oh, yes. Now, when the present landlord and landlady came, the landlord's father did a load of restoration up there. And where the window is open, they've changed it into flatlets for people. So they've like family rooms, but with 2 or 3 rooms together. And that's where the boy, who is now the manager of a restaurant, that's where he lived. And that's where his bedroom was with his little brother. And he said one day, his little brother started crying in the night. So he got up and comforted him. And he looked out of the window and he could see it was thick fog. And he thought, well, this is strange because it was in the middle of the summer. So he went to the window and he noticed that below the window, it was as clear as a bell. But there's like a wall of fog going off to the right and to the left. And while he was looking down thinking, what's going on here? He heard a horse. And then first of all, he saw one hoof appear through this wall of fog. And he described it to me in so much detail. You could tell it had made such a deep impression on him. And the way he described it, I said, that sounds like a Shire horse almost. He said, yeah, it's like a small Shire horse. And then the other one. And then the whole horse appeared with a man, and he described the man completely. He had a felt type of hat on. He said he wasn't richly dressed, he wasn't poorly dressed, somewhere in between. He had a cloak on and it was tied around with a piece of string, not a belt. And the man looked up, saw him, lifted the horse up like in salute on the two back legs. And then the horse came down and the man turned round and went off again back down King Street here. So the next morning, he got up and started telling his mum and dad about it. And the mum and dad were saying, "Oh, you dreamt it, you dreamt it." But other people said, "No, that will be the man who died in the fire." And apparently he'd stabled his horse down there and he thought, well, before I go to bed, I'll just stay and keep him company. And he'd sat down in the straw and he'd lit a pipe and then he'd fallen asleep. And both he and the horse had both perished in the fire.
The Pied Ball isn't the only hospitality venue on the street that has a ghost, though.
Okay, so now we're opposite the Bluebell. And Bluebell's one of the oldest buildings in the whole of Chester. And it's on Northgate Street. And this ghost, we actually know the name. She's called Henrietta. And Henrietta was in love with one of the royalist soldiers during the Civil War in the 1640s. This, of course, was a royalist stronghold. So the place was full of royalist soldiers and they were billeted everywhere, including what is now the Bluebell. And the man who lived there went off to fight the Battle of Rowton Moor. And as he left, he said to Henrietta, "When I come back, we will get married." And so she sat in the top window on the first floor and looked and waited for her husband to be to come home. And the thing is, it was an absolute disaster for the royalists. The way they found out that they had lost the battle was all the heads were chopped off, the dead men, and were thrown into the river. And they saw the heads bobbing down the river. And she's still there waiting for her boyfriend to come back. Now, that's the story. Years ago, somebody who used to be a ghost guide then was telling that story. And somebody in his group actually went to the Bluebell afterwards and said to the manager, "You played a good trick there, didn't you?" She said, "What are you on about?" Just as our guide was telling that story about Henrietta up there looking out of the window, you close the curtains. And she said, "No, I didn't." Now, she was telling me this story when I was doing the rounds, checking the ghost stories. So I said, "Come on, show me." So she took me up the stairs. So I said, "What makes you think nobody else closed the curtains?" So she said, "Okay, you try touching them." And there was a staircase between us and the window. I couldn't reach across and touch the window. And anybody on the stairs couldn't reach up and close the window. So nobody could possibly have done it. And yet somebody had closed the curtains and opened them. So many other stories. Once I was chatting in a pub with a bloke and he was an ex-soldier and he said, "Dear God," he said, "I used to work there as a chef." And he said, one day I was so tired after a really heavy shift. We'd done really well, loads of customers. He said, I just sat on a chair at the back near the ladies' toilets. And I said, I fell almost asleep. And I just heard somebody shouting, "Lee, get out of here." And he said, that really woke me up with a jolt. And I was sort of looking around thinking, what? And he said it came again, "Lee, get out of here now." So I said, "What did you do?" He said, "What do you expect me to do?" I legged it.
And we're not quite ready to come off Northgate Street just yet, as we travel 2 doors down for our final story.
So this building, 1911, it looks glorious, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It was a fire station.
Oh, wow.
It does not look like a fire station, does it? It's got 3 bays on the ground floor and then those 3 bay windows on the first floor. Now, apparently, on the right-hand side, there were 2 fire engines. On the centre one, there were 2 fire engines. And on the left-hand one, there was 1 fire engine and the admin officers. And then in the 1970s, they built a new fire station further out. I would have loved to have seen the fire engines come. But apparently there's a story of George the ghost that via everything. And there was a big Northgate Street festival here one year, and they brought a couple of old fire engines, and there was somebody there who'd actually been a fireman here. So I said, "Did you ever see George?" And he said, "Well, late at night, you could hear clanking and gurgling around the building." And I said, "Ooh." He said, "Yeah, it was the central heating cooling arm." But I met a lady. We actually went there for a meal with a group I'd been taking around. And she said she'd been upstairs for a family function. And she was sitting opposite her grandson, who was about 4 years old at the time. And he had his back to the wall. And they were talking to each other. And he suddenly stopped talking and just tracked. His eyes just went across the room slowly to the staircase and then watched going down. And then he looked at his grandma and said, "Grandma, why is there a fireman in this building?" And I had been there and I said, "There's supposed to be a ghost here. Have you seen anything?" And they said no to me. But when I went down with this lady, because she was related to the manager, he said, "Yeah, well, we do say that to everybody because we don't want it fuss." But he said, every so often we will leave flour on the stairs and we will see footprints in the stairs.
It was truly amazing how many ghosts lie in Chester. As a qualified ghost guide with the Institute of Tourist Gilding, Mary Ann has so many stories to share. And if you want to hear more stories not covered today, you can book on a tour with Mary Ann on the Walking Tours of Chester website. Links can be found in the show notes below. Equally, you can buy her book, Chester City of Ghosts, online. And if you do go to Chester and find yourself on Northgate Street and you're passing by the Bluebell, remember to look up. You never know, you might catch a glimpse of Henrietta still waiting for her lover. That's it for now, but you can also follow us on Instagram at Eerie Excursions. And to be sure you don't miss out on an excursion, subscribe to the YouTube channel below. For our next adventure, we'll be heading to Nottingham.
But here, nobody sees ghosts. First of all, some people will talk about a kind of sickly sweet stench of putrefaction. So they're actually smelling somehow, which is what we call clairolfactants, clear scenting, if you will. The smell of the corpses rotting. Some people will claim that they could hear strangled cries and choking and stuff like that.
See you next time for another venture into the darkness.